has been made into a crow, and then it is no longer one crow but many million. When things are so exaggerated, we have no means of finding out the truth. It is further worth considering that these Gospels, called the books of God, contain preposterous claims, such as that if all the works of Jesus had been reduced to writing, these could not have been accommodated in the whole world. Is such exaggeration the way of honesty and truth? If the works of Jesus were so unlimited, and if they could not be circumscribed, how is it that they were confined to a period of 3 years? Another difficulty about these Gospels is that they give wrong references to some of the earlier books. They do not state accurately even the genealogy of Jesus. From the Gospels it appears that these persons were dull of understanding, so much that some of them took Jesus for a ghost. These Gospels from the earliest times have been open to the charge that they have not preserved the purity of their texts, and there being many other books called Gospels, there is no sound reason why all the statements of these other books should be rejected, and why all that is contained in the Gospels, generally so called, should be admitted as true. No one can say that the other Gospels contain such unfounded exaggerations as are to be found in these 4 Gospels. It is surprising that while on the one hand they say that Jesus was a righteous person, and that his character was without blemish, on the other hand there are brought against him charges unworthy of any righteous person. For example, the Israelite prophets, in accordance with the teaching of the Torah, undoubtedly had hundreds of wives at one time in order that they might thereby multiply a generation of righteous persons. But you will never have heard that any prophet had ever set such an example of freedom that he should allow an impure and an adulterous woman, a noted sinner of the city, to touch his body with her hands, to let her rub oil into his head, art of her immoral gains, and to rub her hair on his feet, that he should allow all this to be done by an unchaste young woman, and should not say to her, "Don't." One is saved from giving way to suspicion which naturally arises on seeing such a thing, only by trusting the goodness of Jesus. Nevertheless, the example is not good for others. In short, these Gospels contain many things which show that they have not preserved their original form, or that their writers were some other persons, not the disciples. For example, can the statement of the Gospel according to Matthew, and this is well known among the Jews till today, be properly ascribed to Matthew? Does it not show that the writer of the Gospel of Matthew was some other person who lived at a time when Matthew had already died? Then the same Gospel of Matthew says, Matthew 28:12 and 13, quote, "And they were assembled with the elders, and had taken counsel. They gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night, and stole him away while we slept." End quote. It would be noticed how unconvincing and irrational such statements are. If the meaning of this statement is that the Jews wanted to conceal the rising of Jesus from the dead, and that they had bribed the soldiers in order that this great miracle should not become generally known, why was it that Jesus, whose duty it was to proclaim this miracle among the Jews, kept it a secret? Nay, he forbade even others to disclose it. If it is urged that he was afraid of being caught, I would say that when the decree of God had descended upon him, and he had, after suffering death, come to life again, assuming a spiritual and a glorious body, what fear did he now have of the Jews? Surely the Jews now had no power over him. He was now beyond and above mortal existence. One observes with regret that while on the one hand it is said that he was made to live again and assume a spiritual body, that he met the disciples and went to Galilee and thence went to heaven, he is nevertheless afraid of the Jews for quite trivial things, and in spite of his glorious body he fled secretly from the country, lest the Jews discover him. He made a journey of 70 miles to Galilee in order to save his life, and time and again asked the people not to mention this to others. Are these the signs and ways of a glorious body? No, the truth is that it was not a new and a glorious body. It was the same body, with wounds on it, which had been saved from death. And as there was still the fear of the Jews, Jesus, making use of all precautions, left the land. All talk of anything contrary to this is absurd, as the one about the Jews having bribed the soldiers in order to make them say that the disciples had stolen the corpse while they, the soldiers, were asleep. If the soldiers were asleep, they could be very well asked how they came to know in their sleep that the corpse of Jesus had been stolen away. From the mere fact of Jesus not being in the tomb, can anyone in reason believe that he had gone up to heaven? May there not be other causes as a result of which tombs might remain empty? At the time of going up to heaven, it was up to Jesus to meet a few hundred Jews, and also Pilate. Whom was he afraid of in his glorious body? He did not care to furnish his opponents with the slightest proof. On the contrary, he took fright and fled to Galilee. That is why we positively believe that though it is true that he left the tomb, a chamber with an opening, and though it is true that he secretly met the disciples, yet it is not true that he was given any new and glorious body. It was the same body, and the same wounds, and there was the same fear in his heart, lest the accursed Jews arrest him again. Just read attentively Matthew chapter 28, verses 7 to 10. These verses clearly say that the women who were told by someone that Jesus was alive and was going to Galilee, and who were also told quietly that they should inform the disciples, were no doubt pleased to hear this, but they went with a terrified heart. They were still afraid lest Jesus might still be caught by some wicked Jew. The 9th verse says that while these women were on their way to inform the disciples, Jesus met and saluted them. The 10th verse says that Jesus asked them not to be afraid, that is, of his being caught. He asked them to inform his brethren that they should all go to Galilee. Footnote, here, Jesus did not console the women with the words that he had risen with a new and a glorious body, that no one now could lay his hands upon him. In short, he gave no proof of the glorious body. Rather, he exhibited his flesh and bones, and thus proved it to be an ordinary mortal body. That they would see him there, that is, he could not stay there for fear of the enemy. In short, if Jesus had really come to life after his death, and had assumed a glorious body, it was up to him to furnish proof of such life to the Jews. But we know that he did not do this. It is absurd, therefore, to accuse the Jews of trying to render negatory the proof of Jesus' coming to life again. No, Jesus himself has not given the slightest proof of his restoration to life. Rather, by his secret flight, by the fact of his taking food and sleep, and exhibiting his wounds, he himself proved that he did not die on the cross. Chapter 2. On the evidence of the Holy Koran and authentic traditions in proof of Jesus' survival. The arguments which I am now going to set out might seem to be useless so far as they are meant for Christians, for these people are not bound by what the Holy Koran or the Hadith say on this question. But I state them because I wish Christians to know of a miracle of our Holy Koran and Holy Prophet, to tell them that the truth which has been discovered after hundreds of years has already been proclaimed by our Holy Prophet and Holy Koran. Accordingly, I set down some of it below. Almighty God says in the Holy Koran, "The Jews neither murdered Jesus, nor did they kill him on the cross. No, they only suspected that Jesus had died on the cross. They did not have proof which could have convinced and satisfied them that Jesus, on whom be peace, had really died on the cross." In these verses, Almighty God states that although it is true that Jesus was apparently placed on the cross, and that they were determined to kill him, yet it is wrong for Jews and Christians to suppose that Jesus did really die on the cross. No, God created circumstances which saved Jesus from death on the cross.